Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening. And now GITEX 2025 on the Nintex booth. So today, whilst of course Nintex is a technology provider, we're going to be talking about ERPs and business challenging necessarily around the supply chain and the finance service lines in large enterprises, effectively. So let me just intro Nintex for those who don't know, the vendor yet, essentially. And I'm Bertrand. I'm from AMO Consultancy Services, and we're here because we are an Nintex Premier Partner. So essentially, we're one of their, preferred professional services arm, and we deliver some of their larger projects on a global basis. So, what is Nintex? Nintex is effectively a unified platform delivering a number of tools and services to facilitate, one, the understanding of your business processes, right? The identification piece, the process, the data, the people, and the system that are all interconnected as, today. What does the landscape look like today? So there's some very specific tools for us to do that. And once you've got this in place, essentially, the idea is that you could identify opportunities for improvements, right? Whether it be cost-saving exercises, performance acceleration, innovation, even. Now, once you have identified these opportunities, you move down effectively the food chain where you start building custom applications that will effectively bring you those new performances you were after, or cost savings or innovations, right? So from the identification space, you move into the build space, right? And here we really are talking about building custom business applications, okay? Of course, I'll get into this a bit more detail in a minute, but the idea is that you've got two large sections here. The middle one around the orchestration piece is the automation. That's your workflow. That's how you transform your business processes into digital workflows, right? So most of which you try and automate as much as possible to gain the efficiencies that we mentioned there. But of course, the best automation pieces in the world don't really matter if they don't engage with the users. Now, the platform, the Nintex platform, is built to really engage from a user interface perspective, but it's also built to match your identity as a business, right? Your branding, your values, what matters to you as an organization, the things you want to push forward to your users to really start adopting, it's effectively the bespoke solution that you're going to build for. Okay? And across the top there, effectively, we now have a lot of different tool sets to bring AI, so Gen AI from a build perspective, that's already widely available. But also now from an end user perspective, where we start bringing in the agentic AI piece, and therefore to give objectives to those agents that are going to do some or the whole of the work on your behalf, as the end user. So that's the kind of overarching platform on a generic basis. But to better illustrate what this looks like, what I wanted to do today essentially is to take two real examples, right? And actually talking about two different industries, but in the enterprise space. So starting with Ipsen, which is a global pharmaceutical manufacturer, and also eVivo, which essentially is the largest grain commodity provider across Europe, and of course growing beyond the Europe zone and going into the Americas. So whilst the numbers look always good and is great, big organizations always come with the largest challenges, right? Both from an organizational structure, but also from a digital landscape, right? How can I make sure that the tool sets that I build today or that are already there as part of my ecosystem, because we never start greenfield, right? There's always a lot of tool sets out there. How can I make sure that I'm a leverage those to enable performance, the savings we were talking about earlier, right? The identification piece, and make sure then that my users really on board change and deliver at their level so that overall, as a big organization, the wheel starts turning. Okay? So we're going to use those two examples today. Now, as I said, there's always a reasonable amount of tool sets out there, and especially in the enterprise world, right? The ERP is, of course, the central piece. It's the big cake in the middle. Everyone has got it. And actually, it makes sense. It's there for a purpose, and it performs, right? It does its job, usually well enough, okay? But we know that it only goes so far. It will do, actually, pretty well, the 70%, 75%. Let's push it a little bit, yeah? So what about the 25%? Now, of course, the vendors here on this screen will tell you they can get to the 100%. Now, the biggest question is, yes, but what is the cost of personalization? What is the cost of getting out of the standard boxes for me to feed my users, get them engaged in adopting and improve performance, etc. Right? So actually, this is where we, Nintex, is where we come in, and this is what I want to talk about today, is how can we improve on the greatness that those platforms bring to those organizations, yeah? And how can we make them better at one, a fraction of the cost, a fraction of the time frame, and actually engage a lot better than those tools will ever do. So let me move on to Ipsen, where we have built a global purchase-to-pay platform. Now, this platform sits over the top of SAP, right? So SAP was there for years. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. Actually, they're currently going through an upgrade program, which is planned to last between 3 to 5 years. In any case, what we've built is effectively a very flexible layer, utilizing the Nintex tools I mentioned earlier, to bring a lot of that performance, the personalization piece that they didn't get out of the box from SAP. Okay? So 4 big blocks, and actually, we say purchase to pay, but source to pay is probably a bit more accurate in this case, because we've got 4 big blocks to the platforms we've built for it. Starting with supply, what we call supply request-based supply management, bringing new suppliers in, get them onboarded, verification of, and the maintenance of those well-known suppliers. Then come the actual budget management. Now, in some versions of SAP, it's not even available, right? So here, in this case, it's a completely independent piece out of the SAP, because we build this for them to be utilized again globally. So this is where they request the budget, and this is where they consume the budget. And you'll see some examples of that in here. Now, once we've got the budget, we're happy because we can spend it, right? So we build the purchase order mechanism. And again, if I put this into perspective, at Ipsen, there will be an SAPT, of course. There always is. They will process all of the demands. Now, all of those guys are specialists, right? They need to be trained. They cost a certain amount of money. And of course, they are a bit of a bottleneck, because that means that every single purchase order needs to go through those guys, because it's the process. And they formally understand the process. The rest, the people in the organization necessarily doesn't, because it's complex, they need to be trained, etc. So here the idea is, by building something bespoke that is very user-friendly, you actually reach out to so many more people within the organizations, meaning that you delegate, meaning that you give a lot more depth and breadth to the teams, the people within the teams, the geographical jurisdictions, etc. You give a lot more independence. You reach out to them. So that's what we've done for the purchase order piece. And then, of course, these go with the good receipt. I'm actually spending the money. I'm getting the goods, I'm getting the services, so I'm signing this off. And therefore, all of this means I'm consuming end-to-end what my providers have sold to me, the budget I've set for those, and of course, the orders that I've placed for those deliveries, right? So that's the functional aspect of the platform that we've built. But there's also another dimension to this is, how do I manage this rather complex process across 40 countries, across then very different jurisdictions with different compliance requirements, with different needs? And can I, as an organization, give them, those local entities, those different geographies, the flexibility that they need to match the localization piece whilst keeping hold of the global approach, right? The global policy that at the end of the day, I need to control as a large enterprise, because otherwise it's kind of difficult to move. So the idea there, as we built this platform, was to segregate layers of interaction amongst the global approach, the local approach, whether being a country or part of a continent, or even like some small, legal jurisdictions. And then we even pushed it all the way down to the user. Because personalization, if you want engagement, is absolutely key, right? You need the screen in the morning to say, hey, hello there, John. How are you today? That's the personalization that we're talking about. It's making sure that as a user, me doing my job on a daily basis, I matter. And I can configure the things that I want to see. And therefore, in the end, I will be presented with the right data at the right time when I need it, right? So let me run a quick sample video of what this platform looks like. Now, let's keep something in mind that's very important, is that, remember, right at the beginning, I said that everything we build is bespoke. That includes the colors that are being used. Now, let's not judge the colors, please, because they were chosen by a group of people. But essentially, the colors also matter, because we have segregated every function that we talked about earlier around the supply management, right? Commitment request, the budget management, the purchase order, and the goods receipts into three different, very clear, user-friendly categories. And from there, essentially, the menu, the screens that you see will always morph and be dynamic against who I am within the organization, the roles that I've got within the purchase-to-pay process, what are my functions throughout. And also then remember the globalization, localization, user piece, right? So we have a multi-dimensional approach to the way the screens have been built. So that once again, I repeat myself, you get presented with the right data at the right time when you actually need it. And so it's all going to full pack of features, and in a minute and a half, it's kind of difficult to really give you all of that. But essentially, because underneath it all, it is SAP, right? This is the source of truth. But remember that we've built a very simple layout where we effectively put together all of those data sets, again, presenting them into the right format, the right mode for the people that are using those on a daily basis. And things that are not always available out of the box, like super complex workflows, like, mega validation processes beyond multiple thresholds, legal jurisdictions, etc., are actually built in. And if you remember, we talked about localization. Now, of course, this is super important, especially when you build the workflows, because you need to give the flexibility to the people on the ground to flex those validation processes, the thresholds, across the budget management, across the purchase orders, etc., etc. Now, the way it's been built is that they have their own admin portal, again, local ones, and they have, for the super users, the ability to change the threshold, to change the validations, to change all of this. Again, this is the flexibility piece I was mentioning earlier. And the key for us to do that is that it will, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. That when you configure all of this and you give the keys to those local users, compliance, governance, and ultimately traceability cannot disappear. Right? It's not because you give the keys to the castle that, hey, it's free for all and we don't know what's happening. So of course, behind all of those matrices, the decision-making process, the workflows, the change enablement, everything is tracked, everything is recorded, and everything is secured actually in completely different databases, encrypted, which you cannot delete, etc., etc. Right? Security by design. So of course, it's not because you are going with a third-party toolset that goes over the top of an ERP that you should forget about security, compliance, and governance. Right? It's built in, and this is what I really wanted to bring to the fore. So now let's move on to the second use case. So for in vivo, remember they are a grain commodity giant, essentially, and they process the grain and they manufacture flour and all sorts of stuff. And the challenge here was slightly different. It was not necessarily around streamlining a process or giving access to multiple people. It was very much focused on how, as a group of organizations, can I streamline my supply management entity, the purchasing piece, but way ahead of that. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. Those guys in vivo have got the tendency to grow externally, meaning they do a lot of merger and acquisitions. And over the years, what happens is this. You get a lot of different SAP instances. You get Salesforce in the mix. So essentially your data points, you get data entries, and where you think your source of truth isn't. Because it's disparate. It's deduplicated across the board. So the idea behind this tool that we actually built for them again, this bespoke piece, was to bring all of those instances together, deduplicating the whole of their record, right, as almost like a middleware piece, right, where everything flows through our platform, which then becomes the source of truth. And once the source of truth is declared, and there's a process for that, then essentially it is sent back to all of those SAP instances and to Salesforce. Now, the real value for this, in this case, is cost control. Because the terms and conditions you're going to manage, to negotiate with such and such supplier, right? Is the video starting? Not really. Let's see it started. What you negotiate from a pricing perspective, or the terms and condition may be different from entity A to entity B. But as a group, we don't want that. You want your master purchasing piece to be I'm worth 13 billion euros, right? Not just 500 million. And so by streamlining the whole onboarding process with suppliers across the group, by creating this source of truth, again, across the instances, you do cost control. You cost control across the suppliers, you streamline everything, and ultimately you have a much, much, much bigger negotiation power. So, it's probably not very clear in the video that runs here, but there is a different types of processes whereby we have deduped all of those suppliers in the first place. So now, of course, we are in steady state where essentially you only ingest new suppliers in, or whenever there's a verification, then you go through the machine and then redistribute the right contact details, the right terms and conditions, delivery, etc., etc. But the core of the work up front, and this was the complex piece, to be honest, was to be able to match the same supplier across potentially, and we have the case in 12 different SAP instances, and decide what is the right version. What is the rule set that is going to tell me that this is the right address, that this is the right contact detail, or what is the right term and condition? So there was an upfront piece of work, and we worked with the specialist for this, which took a reasonable amount of time. But now this is in place, this is running, this is status quo, everything is streamlined. And then essentially we have this really nice flow between the Salesforce and the SAP, entities, and everything is distributed as it should be. Okay. Are we nice validated? Thank you. I'll take some questions if there are some at the end. But given that we've had about 20 minutes slot, it's sometimes a bit difficult to articulate all of the things that we can do. Pretty much whatever it is you want. And very, very, very quickly. So the two examples that I've talked about earlier, the first one, Purchase-to-Pay platform, global scale, 40 countries, 2,500 people, huge numbers of transactions, took us 6 months to deliver, right? So put this into the perspective. If you had to do this on the SAP platform, the number of years it would have taken you to get to that customization level. The second one, which is the supply management, the business partner management, as we've called it very vivo, the first phase of that dedupe piece took us 4 months. And the complexities there were actually far larger than the purchase today, because again, of the variety of data sets and how do we treat the data, etc. And the extra piece around right now is the run phase. How can we use it? Sustainably took us only 2 months. And of course, all of this evolves over time. It's a journey as we know it, right? And so the things that we've built for them is actually flexible from the ground up. Because the truth today is not necessarily the truth tomorrow, because your business will change, the regulation will change. You will expand into different territories. So of course, change is built into those platforms so that you can, preempt, not necessarily react, but adapt to business change and regulations. Of course, we provide the modern layer, the engagement piece that we talked about. I think I've said this at least 4 times out, but this is, I think, in my mind, the biggest piece, because if you present the right data in the right format, not overloading, etc., to the right people, process will just get adopted, right? And essentially, the whole point of this is to create a layer that is bespoke, that automates, that accelerates, and also that simplifies the whole process. Because again, as a user, I don't need to know what the next step of the process is. I just need to click a button and just know and understand that it's getting done. So, probably to conclude on this, what is those 2 use cases present large scale, and it took a bit of time for us to put them together. It doesn't need to be that big, right? You don't need to start at this scale to make a change in your organization. Nintex is nimble enough for you to start implementing simple workflows, simple automation that don't need to wait 6 months for it to actually make a difference. And I talked about ERP today, but you can plug this into anything, essentially, because it's an open platform. So even if the native connectors are not available, we build it for you. So essentially, your options are limitless, but don't get scared by the bigness of it. Start small, deliver quick, fade fast, learn from this, and then you're going to be able to deliver change and revolutionize your digital ecosystem one workflow at a time. Thank you. I'll take any questions. Is there? Yes, please.
Hi, it's Liz here. It's a general question about the corporate employee.
If I understood correctly, there's 2 words, or there's 2 train of thoughts, essentially. You can either push the automation piece through the ERP space, and actually this is where the big investment has been made, so why not? Why not keep on going on that investment and, keeping the return on investment? But we know that extra push, that customization piece is very costly, right? It's costly both from a professional services perspective, from a license perspective, and from a time consumption perspective, because by the time you realize the changes that you've potentially have made into your ERP, things have changed and your business has already moved on. Now, of course, the discussion is slightly different when we come with our very flexible tool set that we plug onto the existing ERPs. Here, the key is speed of delivery, but also speed of change, right? Which I tried to articulate a moment ago. But the second question you had was, what do I do with my data? Right? In time, how can I make sure that the data that is today in my ERP, if I change ERP, for example, if I change system, then that means this piece is useless. Well, actually, it's not, because the way Nintex provides their tool sets to us as delivery partners, and the way we then deliver those end products, is that the over-the-top layer can connect to anything. So the way it's being built is that you simply connect to your source of truth, whether one or multiple, right? And of course, then we know how to handle multiple selection criteria, etc. So if tomorrow you move from A to B, essentially, simplifying it, but it's just right. We don't point here, we point there. It's a size, and there's a bit of remapping, reorganization, but your process that you've put into those platforms is still valid. It hasn't changed, yes. So it's about repointing at the right data sets, and then moving from there, and that's how you give the flexibility. And more importantly, and this is why we work the way we work, is that your ERP, whether SAP or Oracle, whichever, it would always be there. Right? That's the nature of what it does. It's there for a purpose. So your investment that you've made in those ERPs, we are there to actually enhance those investments and actually accelerate the enablement of those investments to the people on the ground to create, again, we talk about cost savings, performance, etc. Have I answered your question? But we'll talk about it. But yeah. Thank you very much for the presentation.
I can see that there will be a lot of returns, let's say, from efficiencies, cost optimization, but also return on employee because of having a better experience overall.
My question is there also opportunity here to actually monetize these, let's say, customizations once they've been built? Because I can see that they're very unique and personalized, but they can also be shared with other entities that are going through more or less the same pain points or the same challenge.
Yes, very good question. So there's a number of avenues around the monetization piece, but of course today I've focused on internal tool sets platforms where essentially you are focusing on the support services function of the organization, not necessarily the core, the revenue making machine. Now, of course, there are other organizations where we don't necessarily focus on the corporate or support services, we focus on core. And of course, the challenges are not the same because there you're not necessarily chasing cost savings or performance. What we're talking about is innovation, creating new service line. You want to accelerate your revenue making machine. And then, of course, in that space, monetization is everything because nothing prevents us today from creating a very unique product. And again, the IP belongs to the customer, right? It doesn't belong to Nintex, doesn't belong to us as a delivery partner. It belongs to the customer, very important, right? Meaning that they can resell at their will the very specific products they would have built with the platform. Beyond that, we've done this before. The way this is built and the layers of the platform are built in such a way that the styling profile that sits over the top as the interface piece, right, that the user will see is entirely interchangeable. And I mean, if I'm bot, I will see a logo and a color and a menu on the left, etc. If I'm John, I will see it blue with another logo, etc. So therefore, and you haven't changed the code. You haven't changed the process. You haven't changed any of the structures you've built. You've literally just changed the styling layer at the top. And this is out of the box. Yeah? There's nothing to configure. It's ready to be used. So actually, from a monetization perspective, and we've done it before, you can then start selling the product that you've created to entities, right, your customers, and actually give them the personalization we were talking about earlier, right? The user personalization, but at maybe a business level, right? Yes. Chris?
Thank you for the presentation. So you mentioned automating parts of value chain, and you mentioned low code. Does that mean that the components can be recycled and reused for other? So we talked about ERP here, but if there's another underlying platform that we need to make more efficient, can we reuse your code and then decrease time to value?
Yes. So the easy answer is yes. So anything that is built on the Nintex platform is reusable. So you don't need to do it twice. And beyond reusable is then customizable. So a feature that you would have developed either for an internal function or a customer, for that matter, you can then literally leverage into a completely different app, completely different process. Meaning that again, from a time to market perspective, the more you do, the quicker you do it, because you build the whole tool set that again, it's not a technical tool set. It's something that belongs to you as a customer, that is your identity, your approach, your features, your functions, etc. And yes, you can reuse and then customize even those things that you've already developed in the past. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for attending. And we can have a chat a bit later if you want. But thank you.